She keeps telling me he'll be back in 5 minutes. He'll, don't. She's asked to call him and tell him she loved him on the phone. I don't know what to say to her.
There are other worries. Dan had no insurance and Kelly has no job. But at the moment, that all seems so trivial after all that she's seen.
And I caught the plane going into the building, and that's all the first night I could think about was I could picture him on it. I don't know if he knew anything or what, but
An image, she says, that will stay with her forever and ever. Ann McDermott, CNN, Los Angeles.
Welcome back to our coverage this morning on the aftermath of the multiple terrorist attacks on the United States. You're looking at a picture of what is now being called Ground Zero. The mayor of New York still calling it a rescue operation until all hope fades. Workers have been there on 12-hour shifts in some cases, 12 hours off. Other workers working 24 hours straight, 24 hours off, meticulously digging through the rubble, in some cases gathering the debris in their hands, transporting it in small pails to larger transportation vehicles. The number of missing continues to grow here in New York City. The city confirming that number is now over 5,000. The FBI this morning calling this the single largest crime scene ever. In fact, the crime area grew overnight when a passport belonging to one of the hijackers was discovered several blocks away from the crash site. That is the latest from New York right now. I want to introduce you to some of my colleagues who will be with me the next several hours. Bill Hemmer joins us from an area not far from Ground Zero. John, you are hot. We can see you. John King continues to stand by at the Capitol from our studios there, and Miles O'Brien is with us from Atlanta. Miles, I'm going to turn it over with you for a broader look at the investigations going on.
Good morning, Paula. The latest developments this Sunday morning are to follow. Senior Pakistani officials are expected to travel to Afghanistan tomorrow. They will be delivering an ultimatum to the rulers of Afghanistan, the Taliban, to surrender Osama bin Laden, who is believed to be there, or face massive military attacks by the United States. One of the 25 people detained last week by the U.S. Immigration and Naturalization Service has now been arrested and is in FBI custody in connection with Tuesday's terrorist attacks. That makes 2 people who have been arrested as so-called material witnesses, and they remain in custody this morning. And New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani today is encouraging New Yorkers to maintain hope that more survivors will yet be found. President Bush continues meeting with his senior advisors at Camp David about possible military options. Mr. Bush spoke by phone last night to Pakistan's president to thank him for his support. A senior administration official says Pakistan's expected ultimatum to the Taliban about surrendering Osama bin Laden is very encouraging news. Pakistan allied closely with the Taliban and ultimately Osama bin Laden. The domestic security component of current military planning is now being called Operation Noble Eagle. Mayor Giuliani in New York says the search for survivors in the rubble of the World Trade Center will continue until there's no more hope. As Paula told you just a few moments ago, so far some 22,000 tons of debris have been painstakingly removed. Of the 159 deaths confirmed so far in the World Trade Center attacks, 99 have been identified. Nearly 5,000 reported missing this morning. No one has been found alive in the wreckage since Wednesday, but hope still prevails. Sources are telling CNN that 2 of the hijackers aboard the jet that slammed into the Pentagon have been under surveillance in connection with the terrorist attack on the USS Cole October of last year. The Washington Post is reporting the FAA alerted the National Military Air Defense Command about the approaching jet in this latest attack, but that warning was not passed along to the Pentagon. American Airlines Flight 77 hit the building about 12 minutes later. 188 people are believed to have died in that attack. That brings you up to date. Let's send it back to Paula in New York.
Thanks so much, Miles. Joining me right now is the senior senator from New York, Charles Schumer. Good to have you with us today. Before we get to what you have experienced over the last day, a quick reaction to the president's declaration of war yesterday.
I think it's the right thing to do, Paula. We will win this fight against terrorism, different as it is from any war we passed, if we're resolute. And if we stick together, if we forget this in 2-3 months, they'll win. And when they come back next time, it'll be even a lot worse than this, as terrible as this is. So declaring that this is a war is the right thing to do. We cannot delay any further. We've seen all the signs with this incident, that incident, and now this horrible tragedy. It's going to get a lot worse unless we snuff it out. Biological, chemical, nuclear.
I think you would even acknowledge that the administration is working very hard to pull together a coalition right now, but some of your colleagues say there are tremendous constraints in place. Do you think at the end of this process it will be legal for the United States to target and assassinate an individual? And if it turns out that indeed the prime suspect, Osama bin Laden, is responsible for it, that you can go after him?
Well, it's a very tough question, but yes, without any doubt. I think there have to be procedures in place so you can't just target willy-nilly. But when you know somebody creates a clear and present danger to tens of thousands of people, I believe that law will change.
Is there going to be a
heated
debate over it, or do you think there is in general support in the Senate and the House to change this?
It's actually a regulation that was passed, I believe, in the Carter administration, and the president could undo it on his own. Now, I doubt that Congress would ever overrule him if he should decide to do it, as long as there are some guidelines in place that make this done with care. But I think in this new world where a small group or even one individual, because of technology, can do huge amounts of damage, the rules change.
We saw pictures of you touring the debris site with the president. Both you and Hillary Clinton have lauded the president for the aggressive actions he's taken on this city's behalf. What else needs to be done? You were down there 2 days after that as well.
We're going to have plenty to do. I mean, this first $20 billion, when I sat in the Oval Office and I asked the president, I said, I talked to the mayor and governor, we need $20 billion. I thought he'd say, well, let me study it, or why don't we start with 5? It's a huge sum of money. He said, you need it? I'm for it. And late that night, when some of the very conservative members of the Senate of his party said no, he stood them down. And what he has done is helped give New York a real spirit and united America. And I think that's really important. After all, if you wanted to look at it in sort of just strictly political terms, we're the blue states.
Right.
We weren't for him, and he easily could have said, we'll give you the minimum we need. He has done the maximum. I give him an A, and I think New Yorkers are just gratified, not only with the president's reaction, but all of America. I was told this morning that the Virginia newspaper said, we love New York, big one-page spreads.
That's pretty astonishing given the arrogant reputation New Yorkers have, and the attitude that's often tagged to us.
You know, we're undergoing, it's the most difficult time we face. In my neighborhood in Brooklyn, which you can almost see from here, I found out yesterday that 4 children at our local public school have a parent missing. I went to our local firehouse, 11 firefighters missing. And this is affecting every community in New York. We need the nation's help. We need them to be there for us, and the nation has been. And God bless America for that. It really has been heartening. One little anecdote. When I was with the president in the motorcade, we went up the west side of Manhattan. Chelsea, Greenwich Village, the most democratic areas. He lost them 9-1, 10-1. People came out of their apartments. They were 4 or 5 deep, cheering him on as the motorcade went by. It was quite a sight.
Boy, that is interesting. There is tremendous concern on what is going to happen here when the markets open tomorrow. We have heard warnings that everybody should be patient, that there's going to be tremendous volatility. You will be at the New York Stock Exchange at opening bell time. give us a preview of what you think will happen.
Well, a lot of care has gone into this. Care in terms of the mechanics, the phone system and the computer systems and the electricity systems, which of course were wiped out down there.
In fact,
They've
I
done
should
a
add,
test run.
when you were traveling here, Con Edison confirmed it's now laying down some 20 miles of cable to try to restore electricity.
And you know, the firefighters and police officers have been great. So have the utility workers and the construction workers. They've all been terrific. The other question is what will happen to the markets? And I think the Treasury Secretary, the Federal Reserve Chairman, Alan Greenspan, the large banks and the large companies are preparing for that. In other words, rules have changed so that companies, if they see their stock go down, can buy some of their stock. I am hopeful that this will be a good opening. I think it's been quick, but a lot of effort and care has gone in, and I think to make a mistake would be worse than doing it quickly, and that's why some of the calls to open this Wednesday or Thursday or Friday didn't make sense. We're ready. I think it's going to work.
I only have time for one more question because everybody wants a chunk of your time today. The president has implored Americans to be prepared for a long and sustained campaign, but in addition to that, he's very much urging Americans to get back to work and try to resume a life that is as normal as possible. Is that reasonable to expect?
I think it's the right blend. You can't say business as usual will never be the same again in America, New York, but to just sit there and twiddle our thumbs is not the right way to do it. It's not really the American go-getter way. So I think we should try to get back to our jobs and our businesses, and then when we're called on for sacrifices, which the military will be and civilians will be, we go forward and meet those sacrifices and do what has to be done. So I think you can do both.
Senator Schumer, good to see you. Thank you
Paul.
very much for dropping by here.
Great job you've been doing.
Thank you very much. Just moments ago, Mayor Giuliani spoke with the mayor of Jerusalem, Mr. Omer, and we wanted to share a small part of that conversation with you right now.
All of the people of New York City appreciate greatly the support that we have in our sister city of Jerusalem. Jerusalem is a city that's even older by a lot than New York. It's a city that we feel tremendous affection for and attachment to. It's the site of the three great religions of the world, or the three great religions that have affected Western civilization, and we feel tremendous bond with the people of Jerusalem. And I particularly feel a very close personal bond with Ehud, with Mayor Olmert, having been to Jerusalem during a period of time where you went through and are still going through things like we're experiencing today. And I remember riding the bus with you, Ehud, when the people of your city shocked and frightened and upset and overcame it.
All right, we interrupt Mayor Giuliani right now as our Secretary of Defense gets a briefing underway. Let's listen in.
Terrorists who are attacking our way of life do not have armies, navies, or air forces. They do not have capitals. They do not have high-value targets that the typical weapons of war can go in and attack. They have to, which is why the president has said what he has said. It will take a broad, sustained effort that will have to use our diplomatic, our political, our economic, our financial strength, as well as our military strength, and unquestionably unconventional techniques. And it will take time. It's not a matter of days or weeks. It's years. It's going to take the support of the American people, and I have every confidence it'll be there. It'll take the support of countries around the world. There are a number of countries that are harboring terrorists. They in some cases facilitate them, some cases finance, in other cases just tolerate. But these people could not be functioning around the globe with the success they are unless they had that help from countries. And those countries, some of them do in fact have armies and navies and air forces, and they do have capitals, and they do have high-value targets. And we're going to need them to stop tolerating terrorists.
In the light of all that, take down the Taliban government?
The last thing you're going to find me doing is discussing intelligence matters or operations.
Sir, Abdullah of Afghanistan's Northern Alliance has offered his organization support in any operation against the Taliban or Osama bin Laden. What role should these Taliban resistance groups play, and what role will the U.S. ask them to play?
The United States needs assistance from countries with intelligence information. We need assistance from countries to deny terrorists and terrorist networks the access to their real estate and their facilities. We need them to cooperate in a host of ways if this goal is going to be achieved. My guess is there will be a number of different coalitions that will be functioning over time. Some will be able to do some things, others will be able to do other things. And how that will work and how that will play out, I think it's hard to say at the moment. But the one thing you can be sure is it'll take a lot of time. It'll take years, not days.
Do you think it's achievable in the light of the difficulties that you've outlined?
I do think it's achievable. I think that it is particularly something that strikes at free people. Every one of the people listening got up this morning and walked out of the door of their house, and they did not have to look to the left and look to the right. They didn't have to wear a flak jacket. They didn't have to get into an armored car. They didn't have to hide in their basement, because we have enjoyed all of the privileges and opportunities of free people, and it's a wonderful thing. And we cannot allow terrorists to deny that of us. Therefore, we must. There is no choice other than to root out terrorists wherever they are across this globe.
Will you support changing the U.S. policy on assassinations?
I'm not a lawyer. There's no question but that there are networks and countries that need to change their ways, and we need to find a host of ways, political, economic, and military, to stop them.
Will the assistance you're seeking from your allies include the use of non-American troops in some of these operations?
This is not a problem that's unique to the United States. There's not a doubt in my mind, but that there will be other countries that will volunteer a variety of different types of assistance.
Have you asked Britain for that yet?
I don't think, I have certainly been in touch with the Minister of Defense of the UK, and as you well know, they are cooperating with us in various coalitions already in Iraq, and they fly beside us, and they are certainly a very close ally with capabilities that are important.
Will you use the military to secure airlines and the airports?
The United States military is war fighters. The role of air marshals is a notably different thing, and people need to be trained for that and to be good at it, and our people have not been trained for it, and we have any number of demands on our people at the present time around the world, and I think it is second, the armed forces of the United States has their charter the defense of the United States from threats from the outside. The threats from the inside tend to be the task of the local law enforcement, the FBI, the sheriffs and people like that, unless there is some unusual event that requires the calling up of the National Guard as opposed to the active force. But because of the laws and the Constitution and posse comitatus, the practice has been for us, the armed forces of the United States, to address external threats.
Think about closing National Airport.
Last question.
Any decision that alters the way we live our lives is unfortunate. Clearly, for a period, we're going to have to be living and functioning with a heightened sense of awareness. Given the attack on the Pentagon, given the attack on the World Trade Center, and given the risks that exist, and the flight paths being right near the Pentagon, the White House, the Capitol building, it seems to me a necessity to close National Airport for a period. And I think it was the correct decision.
How long will it be before you take
We have airports at Dulles, we have airports at Baltimore, which give a great deal more time for a fighter interceptor to do something than a plane taking off from Washington National Airport, which flies right past the Pentagon day after day after day and right past the White House.
Did the FAA give you a timely warning about the plane approaching D.C., and why did our nation's air defenses fail to protect the Pentagon?
We don't have air defenses that are designed to protect the American people from a person inside the United States commandeering an American airline plane filled with American citizens. That is a customs, immigration, local law enforcement task. Anyone who has looked around the skies over the past several years knows that we do not keep aircraft in the air to anticipate some local situation like that. Now, what happens is when an aircraft goes off course, the FAA, as a matter of normal behavior, calls our combatant commander, our SINC, as we say, at NORAD, which is the North American Defense Zone, and says there's a plane that's off pattern. In this case, a plane took off from Dulles, apparently, and flew west and then came and circled Washington, D.C., and then plowed into the Pentagon. You have a matter of minutes, unless you have airplanes in the air or something like that you would use. We do, of course, today have some fighter aircraft in the air at various places in the United States. In addition, we have aircraft on strip alert, 10 to 15 minutes notice, at some 26 bases across the country. Our forces are on what's called DEFCON 4 at the present time, down from 3, a heightened sense of status of alert. And in terms of force protection around the world and the United States, we're on what's called Charlie. We were at Delta, which was the highest, and we've moved to Charlie. It is a very high state of alert. The reality is that a terrorist can attack at any time, in any place, using any technique, and it is physically impossible for a free people to try to defend in every place at every time against every technique. Now, what does that mean? It means that the president is exactly right, that we have to take this battle, this war, to the terrorists where they are. And the best defense is an effective offense in this case, and that means they have to be rooted out. Thank you very much.
There you have it, Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld wrapping up his briefing this morning. Again, repeating a warning that we have heard from a number of cabinet secretaries that Americans should be ready for a prolonged campaign. In his words, one that will take years, not days. He talked a little bit about the kind of help the United States needed from friendly nations, including intelligence information. And in one of the more interesting comments he had, he talked about the fact that he believes a number of different coalitions will be built over time. Let's check in with John King right now to see what he thinks the significance of that means. What does that mean? He was asked a question about the Northern Alliance, which is the opposition force to the Taliban in Afghanistan. Is that what he was hinting at, that perhaps their 15,000 members in some way will join in some sort of effort to help get Osama bin Laden found and turned over to authorities? Is that what he meant?
Well, Paula, certainly from an intelligence and information standpoint, the Defense Secretary is serving clear notice there that if you live around the world and you think you have any relevant information about Osama bin Laden, his network, or anyone else who might be involved in this, the Pentagon, the United States government, most interested in speaking with you. That is why we have seen outreach not only to opposition groups in Afghanistan, but directly to the government of Pakistan. Very tough warning to the government of Saudi Arabia, we are told, to not only to crack down on the Taliban and to distance itself from the Taliban, but to turn over any information it has about financial support from Saudi Arabia into the bin Laden organization. And what you're seeing this morning, Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld out in public, the Vice President Dick Cheney granting interviews as well, this part of a coordinated administration effort to lay out the challenges ahead for the American people. One of the great concerns is, in recent years, Americans may have become accustomed to seeing cruise missiles launched into Afghanistan or the Sudan, those fighter jets still patrolling over Iraq 10 years later, dropping smart bombs. The administration trying to condition the American people that this will be different in going after terrorists. It will be a very different kind of campaign, some of it military, some of it diplomatic, some of it a financial effort to crack down on financial support. As we continue the discussion, I'd like to bring in our Kelly Wallace. She's been tracking the president this weekend in his discussions with senior advisors up at Camp David. Kelly, the administration clearly trying to prepare the American people, on the one hand saying the Wall Street will open tomorrow, baseball will resume tomorrow. On the other hand, buckle down. This is a war that could take years.
Exactly, John, and you're hearing that from the president, and as you've noted, all his top advisors going out really on the Sunday talk shows. Again, preparing the American people for what we've heard the president, all top administration officials say will be a lengthy campaign, a political, economic, even a military campaign against terrorism. I thought it was quite interesting. We heard from Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld at the end of his meeting with reporters saying you can't really defend in the United States against every terrorist everywhere. So he says the best defense is really the best offense, and that's why he's saying we should go after the terrorists where they are. And also, John, pretty strong words for those countries, he said, who support them, who harbor them. He said those countries have capitals and have high-level military targets. It appeared definitely a strong threat there from the defense secretary about any countries encouraging or harboring terrorists. Now, another top official going out today, Vice President Dick Cheney, and he repeated what we've heard from the Bush administration as well, that the administration, in Mr. Cheney's words, is quite confident that Osama bin Laden is the prime suspect behind Tuesday's attacks in New York and Pennsylvania and in Virginia. Also, the vice president talking a bit about a development we've reported all day, the Pakistanis sending a delegation to Afghanistan basically to issue an ultimatum to the ruling Taliban militia, either turn over Osama bin Laden or face a massive military retaliation. Mr. Cheney saying he is quite encouraged that the Pakistanis have decided to stand with the U.S. and the international community.
The key here to keep in mind is that what we're asking nations to do, and which the PACs have clearly made a decision to do, is we're asking nations to step up and be counted. They're going to have to decide. Are they going to stand with the United States and believe in freedom and democracy and civilization, or are they going to stand with the terrorists and the barbarians, if you will? And it's a fairly clear-cut choice, and I'm delighted to see that Pakistan has, in fact, stepped up to the task.
And President Bush remaining at the presidential retreat near Camp David. Expect, though, John, to see the president in the days ahead definitely continuing to use the bully pulpit to, again, prepare the American people, but also to let Americans get on with their lives, and as well, of course, John, to continue to remember those who lost loved ones and those who are still missing. John?
Kelly, stand by there at Camp David. I want to bring Bob Franken into the discussion. Bob is standing watch over at the Pentagon. Bob, when the vice president, when the defense secretary say this could take years, what do they mean and why?
Well, what they mean is that it could take a very long time. Capturing bin Laden, taking out part of the Afghanistan government, for instance, is not going to really address the problem. The very nature of terrorism is what makes this so difficult. Terrorism can be accomplished by just a couple of people. Witness the Oklahoma City bombings. Those were domestic, of course, but they were domestic terrorists, 2 or 3 of them. No more than that. That, of course, is going to make it difficult. How do you get to a couple of people who just decide that they believe in something strongly enough that they're going to do something about it? Several years of what? How long do the American people, do they believe that the American people will tolerate massive inconvenience when it comes to flying around the United States? Massive inconvenience, for instance, when it means going to a sporting event or to a concert or something like that. These are very difficult problems, testing the American will. These are not conventional problems. The nature of terrorism is surprise, as we found out so tragically last Tuesday.
Okay, Bob, thank you there at the Pentagon. Thank you, Kelly Wallace, standing by at Camp David. We need to go back now to New York and Paula Zahn.
And thank you, John. And right now we're going to quickly check in with Tom Mantir, who joins us again from Islamabad, Pakistan, with an update. Tom?
Paula, in the last hour, the Pakistan government has confirmed what we have been reporting basically for the last 6 or 7 hours, is that a delegation, a high-level Pakistani delegation, will go into Kandahar in Afghanistan tomorrow with a message. Now, in diplomatic circles, they don't like to use the word ultimatum, but they are going in with a message to the Taliban. They won't say what the message is, but it is believed to be, and sources tell us, it is basically an ultimatum to the Taliban to turn over bin Laden in 3 days or face massive military strikes. What has been going on at the president's residence today has been confidence building. He has been holding meetings, President Musharraf has been holding meetings all day long with media leaders, with politicians, with religious leaders. Now, each group is about 30 to 35 people. They have been coming in and out of the president's house all day. Basically, what he has been doing has been outlining what the position of the government is and how the level of cooperation with the United States is going to be, basically filling them in and bringing them into his confidence. We've also heard that the president sometime in the next 24, possibly 48 hours, may address the nation here in Pakistan to brief them about what is going on and what is going to be planned. But as we know it right now, part of the deal for Pakistan's cooperation is economic assistance. There are U.S. sanctions against Pakistan right now, and Pakistan also has a $30 billion debt. They may be asking for some debt forgiveness, so it's not a one-way street as far as the cooperation from Pakistan goes. But they're also saying that part of the package deal is asking that India and Israel not take part in any of the military strikes against Afghanistan. Now, no word yet on whether any of these conditions are being met or what the details of the deal are. That's probably only going to come from the president, and he probably hasn't been sharing it with the religious leaders that have been meeting at his house this afternoon. These meetings are expected to go late into the night here in Islamabad, and we're probably not going to hear from the president at least today, because he's tied up in these meetings that are going to last all night. Paula?
Okay, Tom, are you able to hear me or not right now? I think not. We're losing the signal.
Yes, I can.
Oh, you can. All right. Any update on the outflow of people, folks leaving Afghanistan trying to get into Pakistan?
That is a real concern. I talked to the head of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees based here in Islamabad last night, and there is a grave concern that the number of refugees streaming out of Afghanistan in lead up to a possible military confrontation could be tremendous. They're repositioning supplies, moving tents in, trying to be able to process people as they come across the border. The big fear, UNHCR, is that Pakistan will do as the United States has requested, close its border with Afghanistan and prevent a lot of these people who are simply fleeing the fighting from finding safe refuge in Pakistan. But there apparently is a lot of movement, according to UNHCR officials based in Afghanistan. A large number of refugees are making their way towards border crossings in Pakistan. Even if they do close the border, it's a rather porous border and mountain areas that people can simply come across without coming through the checkpoints. But as of right now, they have been coming through the checkpoints in slightly larger numbers. One person told me about normally a trip that takes an hour took 3 hours down the road because it was clogged with people trying to make their way out of Afghanistan. Paula?
Tom, at the top of your report, you confirmed what you have been reporting, or that you've gotten outside confirmation of what you've been reporting all morning long, that this delegation of senior Pakistani officials is headed to Afghanistan. And while some people are sort of waltzing around it, some people are calling it a warning that the Pakistani officials will give to the Taliban. But your analysis suggested that there will be an ultimatum and threatened military strikes. What kind of strikes is Pakistan capable of delivering right now against the rulers of that government?
Well, I think when you look at the number of nations that have diplomatic relations with the Taliban, the Pakistanis can go into this meeting with a high-level delegation with the high-level Taliban leaders, including Mullah Omar, in Kandahar, and really, if there's going to be a wake-up call for the Taliban, it will be presented by the Pakistani delegation that goes in. Now, I have no idea what the diplomatic message that they're carrying, whether it's from the United States or from the president of Pakistan, but they're clearly going to make a last-ditch effort to convince the Taliban to do something, whether it's hand over Osama bin Laden, whether it's to take him into custody, to do something that will satisfy the international community and avert military action. I have no idea what that message is, but as I said, we heard earlier on today that it was an ultimatum to hand over Osama bin Laden in 3 days or face the wrath of the international community. Paula?
Okay, Tom Mateer, thanks so much for that update. Right now, I'm going to check in with Steve Harrigan, who joins us from northern Afghanistan. Steve, does it appear as though the leaders of the Taliban government are taking this ultimatum that will be delivered tomorrow seriously?
Paul, that's a question that we can't answer from our vantage point here. We are in the territory of northern Afghanistan. It's under control of the opposition. These are opposition people here, fighters who've been fighting against the Taliban for the past 5 years. Now, the opposition group just lost its leader a short time ago. General Massoud was assassinated. The opposition figures are linking that assassination to the terrorist attacks in the United States. They are calling for military action against their own country, against Afghanistan, and against the Taliban. So no sign yet about a Taliban reaction to that ultimatum, but here in the north, people are calling for military action against Afghanistan, and they say they would like to fight side by side with possible American soldiers in the region. Paula?
Steve, just about an hour or so ago, I interviewed Dr. Abdullah Abdullah, who is the leader of the Northern Alliance, which is the part of the country you said is under control of the opposition. And he expressed great cynicism about Pakistan's role in this whole process. He essentially said that Pakistan is posturing for more time. How widely held a view is that in your part of the country?
Well, keep in mind something about the opposition here. They control just about 5% of the country, and they're a fighting force that they themselves estimate at just 15,000. So you have to keep that in mind when talking about their opinions and what they say they're going to do. But the skepticism is real among the opposition here about Pakistan. Dr. Abdullah's words off camera were even more severe than what he said to you on camera. He basically came out and told us a short while ago that his one message to U.S. President George W. Bush would be, do not trust Pakistan. According to the opposition officials here, it was Pakistan that created the Taliban, and what they're doing now is stalling for time.
All right, Steve, you just reported that they might have a fighting force of 15,000 in the Northern Alliance. What kind of help could they provide the United States and any of members of the coalition that might be assisting the United States in trying to get Osama bin Laden?
So far, opposition figures say the contact with the U.S. has been minimal. So we're not sure at what level any meetings have taken place. But the opposition figures do say that they have experience for the past 5 years in fighting Taliban, that they know the country, that they are Afghanis, they know who is who, what is where, what objects would need to be attacked. Also that they have the experience and the dedication, that they have lost thousands of lives in this fight, and that they feel that if any military action is taken in Afghanistan, that they should be consulted.
Steve, the Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld, just held a news conference basically repeating a message we've heard a lot over the last 24 hours or so, that Americans must get ready for a prolonged campaign, one that is not going to take days but years. Are folks in the Northern Alliance expecting shots to be fired, bombs to be dropped?
They are, and while on one hand they do want to see action taken against the Taliban, there is also some real concern that the operation could go awry, that civilian casualties could be behind such an operation. These people are very used to warfare. Unfortunately, when you walk around even the village that I'm in, you can see the signs, the monuments, the wreckage of Soviet tanks, of Soviet armored personnel carriers, really left to stand as monuments to the failure of large nations like the old Soviet Union, who came here and tried to fight a war, and after 10 years had to leave empty-handed.
Steve, I don't know whether you could hear Tom Mateer's report from Islamabad, Pakistan, but he just reported there is a lot of confusion at the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan. Hundreds of thousands of people expected to try to get out of that country. What can you tell us about any movement of Afghanis you've seen?
Well, in this part of the country, in the north, it's under control of the opposition. We have not seen that kind of panic. We have not seen people leaving for the borders. But keep in mind, we are in a village in what may be one of the most remote corners of the world. We're surrounded by mountains, and what's going on the other side of this mountain, I can't tell you. So we haven't seen it. Really quite the contrary. What we've heard from opposition leaders is this crisis provides them with an opportunity possibly to take the offensive against the Taliban.
All right, Steve Harrigan, thank you so much for that report. Right now we head back to Washington, D.C., where John King is joined by Peter Bergen, who has given us some really good analysis of what Osama bin Laden represents and an idea of what this campaign might look like if it's launched. Good morning, gentlemen.
That's right, Paula. And we want to continue the same conversation. Peter joins us here, and he can help us. Many Americans probably very unfamiliar with the political relationships just even within Afghanistan, certainly between the Pakistan government and the Afghani government. So a Pakistani delegation goes in to the Taliban and says, give us Osama bin Laden.
Well, I mean, Pakistan, as Mr. Mantir pointed out, is really the only country which really has a lot of leverage over the Taliban, but it's a sort of double-edged leverage for the following reason. The Pakistani military and intelligence services were pretty instrumental in the Taliban's rise to power. So you've got different elements in the government, some in the Pakistani government, some of which are actually quite in favor of the Taliban. Yes, they have leverage, but are they on side with the international community? That's one question that is worth examining. Another thing that I think is important is that the Taliban is not a monolithic movement. In the late 90s, there was a sort of moderating element in the Taliban. This year, we've seen a much harder line group taking over. But I talked to a senior Taliban official yesterday, in fact, and he said that there is a group inside the Taliban who basically are not in favor of the very hard line we've seen coming out of the Taliban. So this delegation that's going in may be able to negotiate with the group of moderates within the movement. We don't know what the ultimatum is really about. I would find it very, very hard to believe that Pakistan would involve itself directly in some military operation. General Musharraf, the leader of the country, has to balance the fact that bin Laden is relatively popular in his own country with the political realities that the international community wants him to help out.
We just heard from Steve Harrigan in the northern part of Afghanistan, where the opposition is. Paula earlier today interviewed a key leadership figure in that opposition. Help us understand, can the opposition within Afghanistan be helpful to the United States here in terms of intelligence about the bin Laden organization, and on the ground at all, should there be military action? And I'll ask our viewers, we have a helicopter flying overhead, excuse the sound.
The Northern Alliance is going to be absolutely critical to whatever happens. We'll have to wait for this helicopter, I believe.
Yeah, speak through.
Okay,
Okay.
yeah. The Northern Alliance is going to be absolutely critical to whatever the United States actually does. Here are the reasons why. The Northern Alliance has been fighting against the Taliban since 1996. They have real-time, very good intelligence about bin Laden's organization. I talked to the Dr. Abdullah, who was mentioned earlier. One of their main concerns in life has been, what is bin Laden doing? Because bin Laden's forces have been fighting alongside the Taliban for the past few years in a kind of conventional manner. So it's not just that bin Laden has a terrorist organization. He also has people who've been, a number of troops, perhaps estimated to be 400, they're called the 055 Brigade, that has been fighting alongside the Taliban. So the Northern Alliance is going to be a very good source of information about bin Laden and also about the country, which they know obviously intimately well.
And quickly, Vice President Cheney saying today that even if the Taliban or through some other means the United States were to come into possession, if you will, of Mr. bin Laden, that that's not enough, that this is a more sustained effort against terrorism. Words likely to be taken seriously?
Well, I mean, I think that if Osama bin Laden magically disappeared from the planet tomorrow, the problem obviously wouldn't be over, although it would have an impact in the sense that he has the charisma, the coalition-building abilities that we've seen, that it makes him significant. Nonetheless, there are other people in the organization who are also virulently anti-American, who we may not know or may not know of now, but we're going to find out more about them in coming days.
All right, Peter Bergen, our CNN terrorism expert, thank you very much. I'm going to go back now to Paula Zahn in New York. As we do, there's a lot of activity behind us here, some helicopters in the air. We heard the Defense Secretary saying a bit ago Reagan National Airport will continue to be closed, but several jetliners have taken off in recent hours. We believe that to be the repositioning of empty commercial jetliners at Reagan National Airport to other airports around the country. Paula?
Okay, thanks so much, John and Peter. We tried to gauge the reaction internationally to some of the latest news, President Bush's declaration of war, and we sent our Martin Savage down to Times Square to talk to folks who are visiting here from all over the world to see exactly what they're thinking, what they're feeling. And Martin joins us now from an area right in the middle of Times Square. Hi, Martin.
Good morning to you, Paula. This is the first time actually that we have ventured away from Ground Zero. And it is a remarkably different world. It's not to say that people here are not affected by what has happened. It's just that they are affected in different ways, and you see it in different ways. And we'll be showing you that throughout the afternoon and the rest of the day as we're here. But as you mentioned, we wanted to talk to people with an international perspective. This is the crossroads of America, sometimes referred to. It's also one of those places in the world you could call the crossroads internationally. And this gentleman here works for the Spanish newspaper El País. It's one of the largest in all of Spain. And we thank you very much for talking to us. What are your readers thinking? What are they saying about all of this?
They are completely mesmerized. They cannot believe what happened, and they are in suspension of disbelief, very moved, and of course thinking in what the reaction of the United States is going to be and what is going to happen next.
What is it you try to tell your readers? What are the stories you send back to them?
I started, of course, in the very moment in which the news came in. I was just watching on TV the news in the morning, and I saw these incredible images. And we, all the people here in the States, and of course in Madrid, started to work hard, and we reported the very first things that we saw, the reaction of the people, the fears of some communities that could have felt a backlash, particularly the Muslims. I've done stories about the situation of the air industry. I just was speaking yesterday with my travel agent, and he was telling me that it's going to be dreadful for his business, and at least a 10% loss of revenue. And since these things are going to continue for a long while,
well, let me ask you this. The people of Spain obviously know, as the people in the United States know, that retaliation is coming. What will people say?
People are thinking, I assume that people are thinking from what we all are reporting and from everything that we are listening and learning, that is going to be a very difficult task to deal with this situation. This is not a conventional war. This is a different kind of enemy. You are not going to have a clear-cut relation with the other side, and even you don't even know who the other people are and how are you going to deal with them. And are states supporting these very subtle networks of terrorist groups? What kind of states? Some of the states are that are recognizing the Taliban are particularly states that are very close allies of the United States.
All right, we have to stop there. Thank you. Good luck in your reporting. We want to show you one of the images here quickly as we go. Flags obviously flying at half-staff. Digital flags wave very proudly over Times Square here. Paula?
And Martin, I know you've gone through the newspapers this morning. I don't have one I can actually, you know what, if someone can, well, I'll do it later. In many of the newspapers across the country, there are foldouts with printed American flags where they're being asked, right there at the bottom there. Here we go. This one out of the New York Times that is asking people to place this in their windows and in their place of employment. To show their strong sense of resolve. We broke into a conversation that the mayor of the city of New York, Rudy Giuliani, was holding with the mayor of Jerusalem, Ehud Olmert, and we had to go away from that because Donald Rumsfeld held his news briefing. But we thought it was important enough for you to hear to get back to. So let's re-listen to part of that conversation that took place earlier today.
All of the people of New York City appreciate greatly the support that we have in our sister city of Jerusalem. Jerusalem is a city that's even older by a lot than New York. It's a city that we feel tremendous affection for and attachment to. It's the site of the three great religions of the world, or the three great religions that have affected Western civilization. And we feel tremendous bond with the people of Jerusalem. And I particularly feel a very close personal bond with Ehud, with Mayor Olmert, having been to Jerusalem during a period of time where you went through and are still going through things like we're experiencing today. And I remember riding the bus with you, Ehud, when the people of your city were shocked and frightened and upset and overcame it. And I remember coming back from my trip to Jerusalem absolutely amazed at the spirit of the people of Israel, how they could live through these kinds of terrorist attacks, go about their normal way of life, and show no fear, even though the terrorists were attempting to make them fearful. So we are so proud that you're naming a street after the city of New York. We feel now that we're just totally united with the people of Jerusalem. We experienced what they experienced, and hopefully we're going to have the same courage and the same determination and the same ability to preserve freedom that you've shown for so long.
All right, once again, we have to interrupt the mayor. You can hear the other side of the conversation with the mayor of Jerusalem to bring you this statement by Secretary of State Colin Powell.
He's been very, very supportive. He indicated support to me directly, and then he spoke to President Bush yesterday. They had a good conversation, and he pledged his support. And I expect in the next several days we will be sending an interagency team to Pakistan to get into greater details about what our campaign plans might be like and what kind of support might be needed. But it's a little early to get more specific than that. But the Pakistanis have been very forthcoming, and I think we should stop saying, can we trust them, can't we trust them? We will see what they are going to be able to do. And yes, I trust them. They've been very forthcoming, and we should can compliment them on that forthcomingness rather than start speculating about their sincerity.
Mr. Secretary, is there any urgency, sir, to solve the Israeli-Palestinian problems as part of the global strategy?
There is always an urgency to solving the Israeli-Palestinian problem. And I have spent a good part of my time this week in the midst of our own crisis talking to leaders in the region, Prime Minister Sharon, Foreign Minister Perez, and Chairman Arafat, in an effort to see progress, to get a meeting started, or at least one meeting going, so that we can see some progress in this time of crisis. But so far that has not come about, but we still have hope, and I'm still encouraging all parties to find a way to meet and begin a dialogue that will result in a ceasefire, and we can get started with the Mitchell Plan. It still remains our goal.
Mr. Secretary,
one more, then I have to go.
America's NATO allies. This is the extent of military support.
I'm very pleased with what NATO has done with the invocation of Article 5 of the Washington Treaty, which says an attack from outside the alliance and any member of the alliance, the whole alliance will respond. And in the days ahead, I'll be having more in-depth discussions with my NATO colleagues as we structure our response and see how NATO members can participate in that response in one way or the other. Don't always think of it in terms of just military terms, but there are a lot of other things we can do with respect to the pressure that we can put on countries that harbor or provide a haven for terrorists. And so we'll be looking to work with NATO and all of our European, Asian, African, South American allies throughout the world to deal with a crisis that has been directed against the civilized world. Let me also say that while America is in a state of grief over the losses we suffered, some 40 countries lost people in the World Trade Center. And some of those numbers are not trivial, hundreds lost from other countries. And so our hearts go out to all of those countries that lost citizens, and that's why this is an international matter and not just solely an American matter. Thank you.
Mr. Secretary.
All right, one of the more interesting things to come out of that short appearance by the Secretary of State is that he reiterated his support for Pakistan. Obviously, Pakistan has pledged cooperation. In exchange for its cooperation, it wants the U.S. to retire some $30 million worth of debt. $30 billion worth of debt. In addition to that, it wants the United States to somehow get involved with the dispute between Kashmir and India and Pakistan. He also touched upon problems in the Middle East, saying he has encouraged all parties to talk and hopes that perhaps a ceasefire could be accomplished. Now, on that note, at the time when the Secretary of State was speaking, for the second time, we were trying to share with you part of the conversation that Mayor Giuliani was having with the mayor of Jerusalem, Ehud Olmert. The mayor of New York is not a man who is given to much emotion in public. What you did not see was his reaction when the mayor of Jerusalem told him that the citizens of Israel are going to rename Jaffa Street, which is the street where so much bloodshed has happened, Jaffa Street, to New York Street. Once again, it would take a third attempt to show you that strain of the conversation, but the mayor of New York incredibly moved by that gesture this morning. When we talk about Israel, there's actually one other note I can add to you. Sources are telling CNN that in addition to what Pakistan has conveyed that it wants from Washington, he does not want Israel, or it does not want Israel or any kind of Indian participation in any military operation around or close to its borders. All right, let's check back in with Bill Hemmer, who joins us from as close as you can get to Ground Zero this morning. What's going on there right now, Bill?
Paula, good morning once again. Just to follow up on that, anyone who's been to the Middle East and specifically Jerusalem knows how significant that move is for the renaming of that street there. Paula, it is Sunday. Normally, on a typical Sunday in the fall, especially in September, tens of thousands of Americans would be getting ready for the NFL. Week 2 was supposed to be played today. That has been canceled. We haven't seen baseball played since last Monday of this past week. And Frank DeFord, a senior contributing writer for Sports Illustrated, with us now live in Connecticut this morning. And Frank, it seems somewhat incongruous for me to talk about baseball and football here about 2 blocks from the World Trade Center, but interesting to get your perspective. The American way of life, what we're seeing with the cancellation of sports put on hold right now to recognize this national and somewhat international tragedy.
Bill, I think it would have been good if we'd played, if we'd gone back to the kind of normality that the president has suggested. It's interesting that we were just talking about Israel and naming the new street in Jerusalem after New York. And when the Israeli athletes at Munich were killed, Israel wanted the games to go on very desperately. I spoke with many of the members of the families of those murdered athletes, and to a person, as bereaved as they were, the one thing they were glad of is that the games went on, so that the terrorists did not have that additional feather in their cap. I think it's very important for us to come together at this time, and there is no better place for the public to come together in America, public of all types, all different sorts of people, than at a baseball or a football game, and we missed that opportunity today.
Frank, I'm curious to know how you strike the proper balance toward giving attention to what some consider normal way of life and also considering what we saw on Tuesday of this week in this city.
Well, Bill, of course, that's the trick, to walk that fine line. But you know, we're human. We're full of all kinds of contradictory emotions. At the same time that we have grief now, we also have a lot of anger. It's impossible to grieve for 24 hours a day. And so the opportunity to come together, to join together, is in a way sort of very therapeutic. It doesn't mean that we're callous. It doesn't mean that we're not caring. It gives us, on the contrary, an opportunity to stand together, to be, in a sense, a kind of an American flag made up of ourselves. And that's the only place that that can really take place is at a stadium. It's a very consoling opportunity.
Frank, so many times that you and like us were paid to put our own words to significant events, but I find it very difficult to find the right words in a case like this. When you sit down and put pen to paper, what will you be writing about?
Well, I have written that particularly since I am a sports writer, and I should more or less confine myself to that we must remember that we are a large nation. We're full of so many diverse types. And as we mourn in different ways, as we worship in different ways, so do we celebrate in different ways. And the opportunity to celebrate should be there. I think it's unfortunate that those who wanted to go to games to take a respite from this terrible, terrible grief were denied that opportunity. I'm glad that the games will be back tomorrow, and I think that will be good for America and help us on our way.
And quickly, Frank, other than moments of silence and the Star-Spangled Banner, which we can all anticipate at this point, what's the proper way to address this, whether you're playing a baseball game in Cincinnati or San Francisco or football games next week?
Well, I do think it's proper to do what you did. If, for example, you play golf on Sundays, I think it's wise to get out there. If you go to church, and pray perhaps a little more, to be with your family. If you just walk in the woods, then walk in the woods. Do whatever it is that you do to regain that equilibrium in your life.
Frank DeFord from Connecticut. Thanks for sharing your thoughts this morning, Frank. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Bill.
All right, Paula, we have seen quite a bit of activity down here in the past hour and a half. We'll talk more about that in the rescue operation that continues, again, 2 blocks from our location here on the south end of Manhattan. Paula?
And Bill, at a time when Frank DeFord described the necessity for Americans to try to get back to as normal as possible of life, the cold, hard reality is that there are thousands of people who have come to New York City, those that lived here, those that were forced to get here, mostly by car, are looking for their loved ones. And right now, Candy Crowley has a piece on a father's desperate search for his missing daughter.
Yes, Dan? Yes, this is David Vincent.
He's an Eastman Kodak executive
How are
from
you?
Webster, New York. A man with a problem to solve, a man on a mission.
How is it being set up so that I can make the best use of my time? Because you're working a timeline here. You have to get to your daughter as fast as you can.
Melissa is missing. She's a technology recruiter at Alliance Consulting.
But we know that
floor is that?
That's 102nd floor of Tower 1.
The enormity of what's happened in David Vincent's life shows on his face, but does not slow his step.